What's going on, and welcome back to a new video. In today's video, we're going to discuss Linux file types and archiving tools. This is part of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux course. So let's get started. So it's vastly important to understand the file types in Linux and how to use the archiving tools in order to compress, uncompress, and archive files. The first type of files we have in Linux is called, the first one we have is the regular, right? So that's the first type of files. Basically, regular file types are just files, right? That you regularly see in Linux. The next file type is the directory. So most of you know what is directory in Linux. The third file type is the block. The fourth is special device, or actually the block is the special device file type. And then you have the symlinks. And of course, don't forget that you have the pipe or named pipe. And guess what? The socket. We will touch on every single one of these down the road, but first it's worth mentioning that the regular file type, it's the one that you see when you list the permissions with ls, you see like the read, write, execute, right? Read, write, and here, for example, you see read, write, execute. So when you see hyphen here, let's say we have a file or test.txt. This is a file, but how do you know that's a file? Because we have the hyphen before the list of permissions. When you see the hyphen here, it means that this is a file. Now, directory. So the directory is when you list the files and directories in a current working directory, you will see here, for example, D, right? And then read, write, execute, read, write, read, write. Here, when you see the D here, it means that this file type is called directory. For example, here, desktop is a type of directory. Now, basically, as you know, Linux does not require an extension to the file to identify its type. Be sure to note that Linux will not rely on this. So txt is not necessary to determine that this is a text file. So how Linux determines that this is really a text file. Now we know that it's a file because there is a hyphen over here. But how Linux determines that this is a text file or it is a PNG file, we will see that later down the road. Now let me switch down to my Linux or Red Hat Linux to explain these two types individually. So if I log in here, okay. So launch the terminal. Zoom in. Okay, so I'm now in this CD2 desktop and create some test files. So we have demo.txt, right? I can create another file, say echo, this is a file, and echo to file 1. ls, so I have file 1 created. If I cat file 1, this is a file. Now, how Linux determines the type of file if the extension is not necessary? So ls-la reveals that, as you can see, this is a file 1, and as you can see, we have the hyphen. The hyphen means that this is a file, right? Now the D, as we mentioned earlier, that it means that this is a directory. Now, determining the file type can be done with two tools. The first one is file, and you put the argument. In this case, the argument is the file type that we intend to determine its type. In our case, it's file1. So as you can see, launching file, we have the output saying that it is ASCII text. That's how Linux determines the file. Now we have another tool called the stats. So stat file1. Now, as you can see, two commands, they report the file type differently. When I type file, I can only see the file type. But when I type stat file1, I can see from the output, it's saying it is a regular file, which matches the file type we have talked about earlier. So it only tells you the file type in terms of a general perspective. It's a regular file, but what does it contain? Is it a binary? Is it ASCII? You have to use the file to determine that. Now, the same goes with directory files. So if I launch stat, let me clear. Okay, leave it. So stat. Okay. So as you can see, it's saying it is a directory, right? Now, stat to the directory before, the current one. No, stat dot. So it's telling you this is a directory, right? Okay, now let's switch back to the board and learn more about the block and character special device files. All right. So we learned about the regular and the directory. What about my board? It's being, I guess, let me close this one. Okay, where is the color? All right, no problem. So what about the block? So basically, block and plus there is the special device files. Special device files. Where do we see these files? So technically, if you, let me add a new page. So here are the pages. Okay, so technically here, if in the dev directory /dev, in the dev directory there are files, there are the block and special character files. So here you can see the block and you can see the special device types files. What's the purpose of the block and the special device files? So the kernel, okay, uses these files to communicate with the hardware. So you have the hardware here. Let's say you have hard disk, and here you have SSD, right, connected to the Linux system. So the information about the HDD and SSD is in dev, right? But how the kernel, the actual Linux, communicate with HDD and SSD? It communicates with these using the block and the special device files. That is the purpose of these files. Let's take an example. If we get back to Linux, so here, if I go to dev and say ls-la, so let's take a look here. Looking for a console, if we have console. So as you can see, the console is denoted by C. So you have the C here. The C means it is a character file, right? And as you can see, we have B. So B, it is block file. We can also use the file and stat commands to reveal the nature of any file in the dev directory. For example, if I type stat or file dev sda, sda1, what's the sda that we have here? Let's take a look. So here are the TTYs. Seems like we don't have SDA here. All right. Let's take it on the console or SHM. So it's saying this is a directory, sticky directory. Let's take it on the console. As you can see, character is special. So these type of files are used to communicate with the hardware that you have, okay? That's the purpose of these files. Okay, back to the board. And my colors are back, see here. Okay, so let's now switch to green color. What are other file types? If you get back to the board one, we see here we have the symlinks. The symlinks, you can consider them as shortcuts. So we talked about that in the first video. I will put a link in this video, or you can access that video from the video cards on the upper left or upper right. Actually, the symlinks, if we get back, no, if we go to the second board here, okay. So we learned that a symlink is created by issuing the command ln-s, right? And then you put here the source file and the destination file. And we mentioned that the actual destination file, okay, it doesn't have content, right? It's only a symlink. And you will see that, let's say, for example, file 1 and file 2. So file 1 is here the destination. File 1 is the source. So when you create a symlink for file 2 by file 1, you will see the arrow here, indicating that this is a link from file 1 to file 2. So it is kind of shortcut, okay? It doesn't have content, but whatever change you make on this one, it will be replicated and copied over to file 2. Okay, so enough about symlinks, file types. We learned about that in the fundamental course. Let's switch now to the compressing and archiving. So let's talk about the tools used in compressing and archiving. So first, we have the Gzip, right? And also we have the Gunzip. So Gzip, Gunzip. What else do we have? We have the tar, and we have another tool. I think you may haven't heard about this tool called Pzip. To be unzip. Okay, so definitely you can use the Gzip, Gunzip. You can use all of these tools for the purpose of archiving, compressing, and of course extracting. But there is one key difference that makes tar stand out, which is the ability to efficiently archive and append files. I'm going to explain that. Okay, let's first talk about Gzip and Gunzip. So here let's take an example. Okay, so the syntax is gzip, okay, and here you put directory name. So it could be desktop. You are willing to compress desktop in one file, or it could be home, whatever. Okay. Now this is for the compressing. Now if you want to extract, you would use gun zip, and here put the directory name. Most probably it will be .gz. Okay, let's take an example. So let's go to cd desktop, cd desktop. So we have demo, we have file one. Let's cd back one directory. We have desktop. Okay. Now let me copy desktop into the same. I will copy it in the same directory but with different name, desktop v1. So we have to specify the -r since we are dealing with directory. So technically we would issue gzip, okay, -r desktop v1, and by issuing this command, all of the files under this directory will have been compressed. If we go to desktop v1, see all of the files now have the extension gz, which means they are compressed with gzip. Now, what if you want to decompress them and restore them back? We would use the gunzip, and the name of the file, which is demo, on the other file, which is file 1. So if you ls now, you see they have been uncompressed. Okay, let me switch back to the board. All right. So here I made a mistake. It is -r. And here you mentioned the name of the directory, right? But gunzip works only on files, so we would remove that, and here put file name, file.gz. This will uncompress the file. This will compress all of the files under this directory. So that's it for gzip and gunzip. You may have noticed that with gzip and gunzip, we may be able to compress files, we may be able to uncompress files. But as you can see, what if you want to just compress the whole directory, okay, and this directory will be in the extension of gz or tar. So in this case, we would use the tar, which is the unique archiving and compression tool we always recommend. But before touching down on tar, we would also mention how to use Pzip. So technically, let me switch to a new slide here. Okay, so we may ask now, what is the difference between Gzip, okay, viz Bzip 2, or between gunzip, which is for uncompressing, is bunzip. So the first thing worth mentioning is that first, so both can be used for compression and decompressing files. So you can use both decompress and compress. But the second item, okay, is that there is a speed difference. So basically in Bzip 2, which is here, okay, Bzip is faster, or has, let me say, it's faster and has better compression ratio. Let me say better compression ratio. So technically, if you have larger files, okay, actually it is not faster, it is slower. Again, I made a mistake, it is slower here. Why? Because it takes much more time to decompress the files or compress the files, and that's why it's giving better compression ratio. Okay, so technically it has a better compression ratio. I mean, the smaller target file size will be smaller. So at the end, if you have a file that's compressed with Gzip and one that's compressed with Pzip, the one that's compressed with Pzip will be smaller. Okay, but it is slower. Okay, so smaller file size. Okay, but the rate is slower. That's why these differences are evident on large files. If you have large files, you may have to choose between one of them. If you choose the Gzip, or if your priority is for faster compression, you will use the Gzip. Fast. Okay. Now, if you prioritize the compression ratio and the file size, you would use the Bzip, which is small or smaller file size. Okay. All right. Now let's start with tar. So let's make a separate page for tar. So tar, as you know, is everything. You know, you can use it for archiving, appending files, appending a file to an independent archive. So you have created an archive or a compressed file, and you would like to add another file. Okay, you would use it's called appending, right? And after you append a file, the extension is tar dot or only tar. Let's only make it now tar, and it is called tarball. So the end file, let's say it is directory.tar, it's called tarball. Okay, and there are many options that we can talk about to use tar or create cases. So for example, say, let's talk about the first case. So the first case is one, compressing directory and directory. Okay, now for compressing a directory, what we would do here, we would do tar, and the options are three options actually. Technically, we would issue three options: C, V, F. So now YC, YV, and YF. Let's explain the, or let's decode these options or flags. So first one, we have C. C is creating tarball, which is the .tar file. V for verbosity. And finally, F, specifying name. You want your final file to have a name, you would use the -F option. Okay, now let's get back to the command. Okay, so say here that my target file or the destination file will be home.tr. Okay, that's the destination file name, and I'm compressing the home directory. Here I specify the target file, target directory. Okay, we're going to take an example now after I finish. Now, let's switch now the page and talk about another case. So, say that or let's talk about appending files. Appending files. So let's say you have a file, a compressed file name. Let's talk about the last example. We have home.tar, okay? So we have a ready tarball. And say that you have you have a file called test.txt that you want to add to this tarball, right? This is called appending. So you would use tar to append this. So the command will be completely different. So tar, okay, and now we would say -cvf, -cvf, and here we put the tar name, tarball, just home tar, and then we put the file name, which is test.txt. This will add test to home tar to be within the files that are compressed. Actually, this one is not C, it is R. So the option for appending is R. Okay. So here we would highlight this one. So R for appending. Okay. Now let's say you want to list all the files included in the home tar. Okay. So you would use a different command. So basically what we will see here, or say tar, or let me remove this one. Here say we want to list files. So basically we would say tar and then start the list of flags T, V, F, and put the tarball name. The tarball name in this example is home.tr. So -t is used to list all of the files, okay, that are included in this archive. Now, what if we want to extract all the files? So the fourth case is extracting files. So back to our example, we have home.tr, and home has many files in here. Files, okay. Now we want to restore access to these files. We want to extract them. So we would issue a specific command, tar -x vf, okay, the tarball, which is home.tar, and it is optional that you mention the target directory, okay, or where they will be compressed. If you leave this as it is, it will uncompress or extract the files in the current working directory. Okay, enough talking. Let's talk about now how do we apply all of this knowledge. So you install tar, in case I don't have it. Okay, so we already have tar. Oops. Okay. So what do we have now? We have demo and file. Let's cd back. So let's apply the example we have on desktop v1 directory. So say I want to archive this directory, okay, and take it all in one tarball. So I would say tar -cvf. Tarball name, the destination tarball name that I would like to name could be anything you want. Let's say it is archive.tr. The destination directory that I would like to apply the compression on is the desktop v1. So you see here now we have a compressed archive file or tarball called archive.tar. So we talked about how we can list all of the files, so we can apply the same command, but here remove desktop v1 and replace C with T. So doing that will list all of the files in this or included in this tarball. Demo.txt file and the directory. So say we want to append a file. So let's create a file here, echo append. This is to be appended to append append is here. Now again tar-rvf, the tarball name is archive and the file to be appended is append. Okay, so if I list now, what do we have in this tarball? See, now we have the append, right? Now let's say apply the last example, which is extracting all of the files in this tarball. So tar-xvf archive, and this will extract the files. So see here we have the directory, which is this one, cd desktop. And there you go, we have the files, and of course we have the file that has been appended and now it is unappended. So that was about today. Next we will talk about file editing with various editing tools, text editing like Vim and Nano. So that was for today, and see you the next